Hey YouTube, how's it going? Today I'm going to quickly show you how to torque the steering bearings on a Yamaha FJ-09. But first I just have to brag that it is the middle of February here in central Iowa and it is 70 degrees outside right now. So it is time to put the snowblowers away and get out the motorcycles. But my bike got to ride to campus today and it was absolutely beautiful. And my wife is regretting that she didn't ride her FJ-09 to work today. She already told me. And so she might want to go for a ride on it when she gets home here in about an hour. But I'm going to quickly show you how to torque the steering bearings. The very first thing we have to do in order to complete this service is to get the front wheel suspended in the air. Now, given that the FJ-09 comes from the factory with a center stand, this makes this very easy. We just put the bike on the center stand, and then we just need to use some sort of jack to pick up the front wheel. And we're going to be going ahead and jacking it up on the headers on the exhaust, but this does not apply a great deal of weight to the bike. The bike is being supported by the center stand. We're only pivoting the weight toward the rear by doing this. It's probably a total of 30 to 40 pounds total that you're putting on it, but you can see here I can come and just press down on the passenger seat and pick the front of the bike up with my single-handedly. So this isn't a great deal of weight and it's not going to be for very long. So I have a Harbor Freight motorcycle jack that I'm going to use to do this. I bought this back when I was riding a cruiser every day. I don't really use this much anymore because given the fact that both of my bikes, the FJ-09 and FJR, have the headers running underneath the engine, this jack doesn't come to be useful very often to me. But in this case it still is. So all I'm going to do is I've positioned the jack under the front exhaust. And you might say, well, Nate, why couldn't you just put the jack there under the oil pan and jack it up on the oil pan? Well, I was going to do that originally, but that because the oil pan doesn't go all the way across, if you try and jack it up on the oil pan and not on the exhaust, it actually wants to tip the bike sideways. So that I quickly stopped doing that. So just get out here in front of the headers and just gently raise this up and it'll tilt the bike back, and you can see now front wheel is free to spin here in the air. And so let's get to work on getting these steering bearings. The very first thing I need to do is loosen up the upper handlebar mounting bracket, which is held in place by 4 6mm hex key Allen bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen these up. It's going to turn the bars as I apply a torque to them. So let's see if it'll make sure my camera is going to stay steady. Okay. This is now going to allow us to lift the bars out of here and just set them gently down right there. But what we really needed to do that for is because we're going to take this large socket off. This is a 27mm socket, or steering stem head nut. And this nut, you might have to go out and buy a 27mm socket if you don't have it already. It's not extremely common. And this is torqued to a high torque spec, so when we put this back on, we'll definitely want to use a torque wrench. So let me go get my 27mm socket ready, and I'll get this loose. I'm using my 27mm socket, which is a 1/2 inch with a long extension and a breaker bar to break this torque, because it is of high torque value. Okay, and it comes loose just like that. And then I'll take my breaker bar off, and I'm just going to spin it loose from the rest of the way by hand. There's a washer underneath it. Okay everyone, I skipped filming a step because admittedly it was a little bit confusing to me, and I thought I didn't find a page on the service manual that was very clear about what I was supposed to do. I thought it would kind of glanced over that, or maybe I just couldn't find it and got impatient. But regardless, I removed the steering stem nut, and there's a washer below it. I removed that. This is a high torque value. I believe it's 80 foot-pounds. I'm going to confirm that when I actually torque this. But I expected that when I loosened this nut, this upper fork and steering bracket was going to lift off so that I could get down here to the steering stem bearings to check the torque on these. That didn't happen, and I'll show you why. Because there are two pinch bolts on the forks that are also the 6mm hex, the same that holds the handlebars on. One's right here, and then the other is right here. And to access them, you gotta probably wiggle the handlebars back and forth to get the socket to line up, or you at least have them straight. You might be able to do that. But if you had you probably had the bars turned because you were loosening the steering stem nut. Yeah, so anyway, what that allows you to do once those pinch bolts are loose is pick this upper bracket up off of the steering stem enough that you can get to these bearings right here, which are what we're here to check. So the very first thing you have to do at this point is remove this locking washer, which, let me slide this off of here. This little washer just slides on, and there are two nuts here. One of them is actually, the lower one is actually providing the torque to your steering bearings, and the upper one is just locking that first nut in place to prevent it from moving. And then this final washer locks into both of them and makes sure that those two nuts have to spin together. So this comes off. And then this first nut should come off by hand. So I'm going to give it a little spin by hand, and it's actually being kind of stubborn to come by hand. Got it, finally. Okay, so it did come by hand, but it was a little bit stubborn. So anyway, spinning this off of here. Gotta lift. There it goes. So on the bottom of this is supposed to be a rubber washer, but it may or may not come off for you. Mine came loose and is now stuck here, and I'm gonna have to pry it off. And here it comes. Okay, so this washer is just a piece of rubber, goes in between the two steering stem nuts. And so it may stick to your top washer, or it may come separate. It doesn't really matter, but just be aware of it, that it goes in between those two. Definitely another pro tip is you really do want a towel on, because as you can see, my handlebars are resting here on one or the other side of the paint, and if without a towel here, the handlebar controls would be contacting the paint and probably leaving scratches. So now I've got to remove the bottom steering stem nut. I'm not really going to remove it. I'm going to loosen it up so that it is, fully loose, and then I'm going to apply the torque sequence so that I know that the torque value on it is correct. This nut gets torqued in 2 stages, and contrary to most nuts, we're actually torquing it to a high value to seat the bearings, and then loosening it up again and torquing it to a low final value. So let me show you how I'm taking these nuts off of here. So this is the top steering stem nut that I took off, and as you can see, it's got these weird flanges cut into it that fit into this special socket that I have, and if my camera will ever focus, then you can see how this works. This socket grabs onto the outside ridges of the nut and is able to then tighten and torque it. Now this particular tool that I'm using for this, I think is it's not the same as the tool that Yamaha specifies, and I think this is actually a little bit better tool, but I'm going to give you my opinion on that now and why. So the thing that Yamaha uses is a stamped piece of metal, and if you go look at Brian Glenn of Two Wheel Obsessions video, where he does this procedure on the FJ-R, he uses the Yamaha tool, or a clone of the Yamaha tool. Doesn't necessarily mean he bought it at the Yamaha dealer. The Yamaha dealer tool is a stamped piece of metal. It's like a hook where you put your socket wrench in a offset position about 1 or 2 inches away from the actual nut. And you have to put your socket wrench at a 90-degree angle to the arm of the tool, and you apply the torque, and it loosens and then tightens and torques these nuts. You can find those stamped tools online for a probably very reasonable price, $20 or so, maybe give or take. This I found on eBay, and it is an actual socket, so you don't have to worry about the 90 degrees portion. You can just go straight down on top with a normal socket wrench. Now it is a 1/2 inch socket, and the ultimate torque that we're going to is 13 foot-pounds, and I don't have a torque wrench. My 1/2 inch torque wrench doesn't go down that low, so I'm going to have to use my 3/8 torque wrench. So I've got a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter for when I torque this, so I can use my 3/8 torque wrench. But that's regardless. I basically use this 1/2 inch socket to get on the nut and torque it to the correct values for the bottom, and then this top one actually just gets put on to hand snug tight. Here's a little crude sketch that I drew illustrating what I'm trying to explain about the torque being the same regardless of whether you use Yamaha's recommended tool or the socket that I purchased. The way you calculate a moment is based on the magnitude of the force times the perpendicular lever arm. So here I've crudely drawn the nut that we're trying to loosen / tighten, and this would be Yamaha's hook type tool with the offset position for you to hook in your socket wrench. And then here's your torque wrench, and you've got this distance, which we're assuming your torque wrench is exactly 1 foot between the ratcheting mechanism and where you're applying the force. And then so since it's exactly 1 foot, and you're going to apply the 13 foot-pounds to achieve the 13 foot-pounds final torque. You multiply this force magnitude by this distance to get the torque, and that torque is going to be identical at point A, which is the center of this nut, as it is at point B, because this perpendicular distance of 1 foot is the same, whatever that is. Now in real life this may be half a foot and you may be doubling that force, or it depends on your torque wrench, but that's your torque wrench is measuring the magnitude of torque. But the point I'm trying to make is that is why Yamaha requires you to have your torque wrench at 90 degrees to the tool, because then they can accurately specify the torque for this bolt. So it doesn't matter if I use this Yamaha tool or the special socket that I bought and I just am directly on top of the nuts, the torque magnitude. You can't buy this tool anywhere in the United States. I had to buy it from a seller. I believe they were located in the UK, and then it had to come across the pond, and so I think I ended up spending $40 to $45 for this socket, which was way too much money. But I own 2 Yamaha bikes that this tool will come in handy for. My wife's FJ-09 and my FJ-R, that both require this tool to torque the steering head bearings and then also to grease them at the appropriate intervals. So because I will be using this tool on 2 bikes and I'll be using it, enough, I decided it was worth it to get what I consider to be the better tool, the socket, for my needs. Now if you're, I don't know, you may be in a different situation. You only have 1 bike and you may not put miles on it very quickly, and maybe you trade your bikes in every 10,000 miles or something like that. And if that's the case, just get the stamped tool, because you're not going to recoup your money. It's probably not worth the investment or your time saved by getting this special socket. Just buy the stamped tool; it'll work just as well. Maybe just a little bit more cumbersome. But anyway, so far I like this tool. As far as its ability, it's kind of tricky to line these holes all up at once. As you can see, I've been messing with it while I'm talking with you. So this is the tool I'm using. When I've already loosened the bottom nut, and so now I'm going to take my torque wrench and I'm going to torque it to the first specified torque, which will seat the bearings, and that is 38 pound-feet, aka 52 Newton meters. So I'm going to torque that with my torque wrench, and then I'm going to, after I do that, I'm going to loosen it back up to below 5 or 10 foot-pounds of torque, and then I'm going to torque it to this final lower torque specification, which is 13. Oh, come on. Okay. Okay, I had a little bit of torque wrench issues there. It was much easier to achieve the 38 foot-pounds with the half-inch torque wrench than the 3/8 torque wrench. And the half-inch torque wrench will do the 38, so I was able to get the 38 foot-pounds applied with the half-inch wrench. Then I loosened it up with a regular non-torque wrench. And then I applied the 13 foot-pounds just now with my 3/8 wrench. And so now it is properly torqued. And now I will put on the rubber washer again. And I will turn this to be hand tight on top of it. Okay. Hand tight where it lines up, and the locking piece will now slide down exactly like that. Come on. There it goes. Alright, it is locked together just like that. Okay, and now I can grab the upper handlebar mounting bracket, gently kind of scoot this towel out of the way, slide this back down into position. Like I said, get the towel out of the way. Alright, just like that. And, alright, perfect. Now, what we'll do is we will torque down our steering nut, and then we'll tighten the pinch bolts. So, what I do is come over here and get the washer, place it down, and this washer definitely seems to me to have a flat side, so flat side down, and then I'll put the upper steering nut back on. Okay, now back to the half-inch wrench, because this is a high torque, half-inch torque wrench. Let's see, what is that torque? I'm pretty sure it's 80. Ouch. And 80 pound-feet of torque. Okie dokie. And there's the torque spec for that bolt that we just did. 38 foot-pounds to start with, then back off to 13. So, I'm going to set my torque wrench to 80 foot-pounds. And okay guys, it's time to torque the steering nut head bolt. And this is 80 foot-pounds of torque. This is no joke. It's a large torque value, and you just don't want to mess around with this. This is life and death, okay? You need to use a quality torque wrench to get an accurate value when you torque this. It's just no way around it. Okay, that was quite a bit of force. 80 foot-pounds on a large half-inch snap-on torque wrench. You need to use a torque wrench. If you don't have one, buy one, borrow one. Get one that's made in USA. Hey guys, then the upper bracket pinch bolts, these 6mm bolts over here on either side of the torque, get 19 foot-pounds of torque. I had a little bit of trouble finding this torque specification in the service manual. I had to go to Chapter 2 specifications and look at upper bracket pinch bolt, and that's where I found it. It's 19 pound-feet. Okay, that's one side. I'm going to do the other side. Ready to clamp the handlebars back into place, but as you can see, the handlebars as of now will rotate quite a bit, and you obviously want to put them in the correct spot. And Yamaha's made that really easy for you. What they've done is placed a mark right there on the handlebar, a little divot on the left-hand side. And you are supposed to align that divot so that it is on the left side of the left handlebar mount and right at the top of the bottom of the bracket. So basically where the two brackets meet in that pinch zone, right where I've got it right now, this is where you're supposed to tighten the handlebars down on. And so if I let go, yeah, it's gonna move. So I don't know if I can do this with one, I'm gonna need both hands and I can't film it, but I'm gonna line this back up, place those brackets on top, and get the bolts started in finger tight enough so that it'll hold it in place. And then all 4 bolts get torqued to 16 foot-pounds, and you're supposed to torque the front bolts first. So do these 2 closest to the ignition first, and then come to the back and torque the back, and all 4 of them get 16 foot-pounds. And then your handlebars will be back correctly installed. Okay, I've got the bolts just hand snug for the handlebars, and I've got the alignment mark right where it should be. So I'm going to torque down the front pinch bolts for the handlebars first, and of course it's going to turn the handlebars, doing 16 foot-pounds. Okay. Final step is to remove the towel and make sure that if we turn the bars all the way this way and all the way this way, that nothing contacts the plastic on the bike, and the only thing contacting the plastic at the moment is the camera tripod. So you can see there's no contact there. This is all the way cocked to left, and all the way cocked right, no contact. So we'll just verify now that cables are routed correctly, that there's nothing getting bound up, and everything looks okay to me. And we're done. That is how you check the steering torque on a Yamaha FJ-09, aka MT-09 tracer. Hope this helped you. If it did, give me a subscribe or a thumbs up, comment, like, share, do whatever. I appreciate any of the feedback I get. Have a great day.